The police officer's hand moved toward his holster and my heart stopped beating for exactly 3 seconds. I was standing in my own front yard, wearing paint-stained jeans and a ponytail that had seen better days, and a woman I had never met was telling 2 armed officers that I was a criminal trespasser who needed to be removed immediately. She was pointing at me like I was something dangerous, something that did not belong, and in that moment I realized that everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, could be erased by one person's assumptions and one bad decision. This is the story of how a neighborhood bully tried to destroy my fresh start, and how the universe delivered the most satisfying moment of justice I have ever witnessed in my entire life. You know that feeling when you are halfway through moving boxes, and suddenly the entire neighborhood decides to notice your existence? That was me on a Tuesday afternoon in early September. Sweaty, exhausted, elbow deep in bubble wrap and packing tape. My new mailbox was half installed, leaning at an angle that my father would have called ambitious. 3 unopened boxes labeled kitchen sat on the porch, mocking me every time I walked past them. I had been in this house for exactly 48 hours, and I had already discovered that the previous owners had left behind a broken garbage disposal, a family of mice in the basement, and absolutely 0 working light bulbs in the garage. I had picked this street because it felt right the moment I drove through it. Quiet mornings with birds actually singing instead of car alarms blaring, kids on bikes riding in lazy circles around the cul-de-sac, the kind of place where neighbors still borrowed cups of sugar and returned them with a smile and maybe a plate of cookies. I had spent 22 years in the military, moving from base to base, apartment to apartment, never staying anywhere long enough to learn my neighbors' names or plant a garden that I would actually see bloom. This was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be home. Before we dive into what happened next, drop a comment and let me know which country you are watching from. I love seeing how far this community reaches, and it always amazes me how many people from around the world have dealt with the exact same kind of neighborhood drama. I was adjusting the angle of my mailbox when she appeared, and I used the word appeared deliberately because she materialized out of nowhere like an omen wrapped in a pastel windbreaker. She had a clipboard clutched against her chest like it was a weapon, and her blonde bob was so perfectly styled that I immediately felt self-conscious about my own disaster of a ponytail. Her eyes were narrowed in a way that suggested she had already decided something about me before she even opened her mouth. And you are, she did not ask this question, she demanded it. Her pen was poised above that clipboard like she was about to write a citation. I straightened up and tried to project the kind of confident friendliness that usually disarms difficult people. I'm Rachel, just moved in 2 days ago. I stuck out my hand for a handshake and gave her my warmest smile. She did not take my hand. Instead, she jabbed her pen at my front yard, as if she was staking some kind of territorial claim. We were not notified, she said. Her voice had an edge to it that made the simple statement sound like an accusation. I let my hand drop and kept my smile in place. I sent an email to the HOA 2 weeks before the move. I have the confirmation if you need to see it. She sniffed, actually sniffed, like she had detected something unpleasant in the air. Do you have proof of ownership? I pointed toward the moving truck still parked in my driveway. My driver's license, the deed, the closing paperwork, all of it is in there. I can show you if you want. Her eyes swept over the truck, then over me, then back to the truck. We have had squatters before, she said. Her tone made it crystal clear that she had already categorized me and placed me in a box that did not deserve the benefit of the doubt. I felt something cold settle in my chest, that familiar feeling of being judged before being known. I had dealt with it before in my career, in my life, in moments when people looked at me and saw only what they expected to see instead of who I actually was. But I was tired and sweaty, and I had spent 18 hours driving a moving truck across 3 states by myself. I did not have the energy for this. The woman's name was Barbara. She introduced herself only after I asked directly, and even then she said it like she was doing me a favor by sharing the information. Barbara Jenkins, HOA board member. She tapped her clipboard with one manicured fingernail. We take security very seriously in this neighborhood. I wanted to ask her what exactly about my presence seemed insecure. I wanted to point out that I was literally installing a mailbox with my name on it, which seemed like a fairly obvious sign of legitimate residency. But I had learned a long time ago that some battles are not worth fighting in the moment, so I nodded and said I understood and told her I was happy to provide any documentation she needed. She did not ask for documentation. She did not verify anything. She just wrote something on her clipboard, gave me one more suspicious look, and walked away down the sidewalk like she was patrolling a perimeter. If you believe that people like Barbara should face consequences for their behavior, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, because we share stories every single day about entitled bullies who learn that their actions have real repercussions. And trust me, this story is just getting started. Over the next 48 hours, Barbara made a hobby out of hovering near my property. She took photos from behind her hedges, her phone barely hidden as she pretended to examine her own rose bushes. She peered around corners whenever I came outside. She made a show of checking other people's mailboxes, walking slowly past my house with exaggerated purpose, like she was conducting some kind of surveillance operation. The first time she directly challenged me about my mailbox, I was kneeling in the grass, tightening the final bolts. The mailbox was black with clean white numbers, simple and functional, exactly like the one I had seen on the HOA website's approved list. "That style is not approved," Barbara announced from the sidewalk. She had appeared silently, which was becoming her signature move. I looked up at her, then looked down the street. I pointed at my neighbor's house 2 doors down. "That mailbox is identical to mine." Barbara's face flushed red. She sputtered for a moment, clearly caught off guard by having her authority challenged with actual evidence. "That one is pending review," she finally managed. She muttered something about HOA specifications and stalked off without another word. That night I met my actual neighbor. Her name was Tanya, and she lived in the house directly next to mine. She was a few years younger than me, with warm brown eyes and the kind of easy smile that made you feel like you had known her for years. She showed up on my porch with a plate of lemon bars and an apologetic expression. "I am so sorry about Barbara," Tanya said as I invited her inside. "She has been like this ever since she joined the HOA board. I swear she thinks she is running a military operation or something." I laughed at that, probably harder than the joke deserved. "If only she knew," I said. Tanya tilted her head, curious. "Knew what?" I waved my hand, dismissing the question. "Nothing, just that I have dealt with actual military operations and they tend to have better leadership." Tanya's eyebrows went up, but she did not push. Instead, she helped me unpack my kitchen boxes while we talked about the neighborhood. She told me about the families on the street, the annual block party, the way everyone came together when one of the older residents needed her roof repaired after a storm. She told me about the giant maple tree in my backyard, and how the original owner had planted it the year his daughter was born, and how the neighborhood still called it Emma's tree, even though Emma was now in her 50s and lived 3 states away. What I did not tell Tanya that night was my own story. I did not tell her about the 22 years I had spent in the army, rising through the ranks, deploying to places that most people only see on news headlines. I did not tell her about the nights I spent wondering if I would make it home, or the mornings I woke up grateful just to be breathing. I did not tell her that I had retired as a lieutenant colonel, with enough medals and commendations to fill a shadow box, or that I had chosen this quiet street specifically because I wanted to finally, have a life that felt normal. Those were things that would come out eventually, but not yet, not that night. On day 3, everything escalated faster than I could tighten a screw. I was in my front yard, attempting to plant some marigolds along the walkway, when I heard Barbara's voice rising from the sidewalk. She was packing back and forth, phone pressed against her ear, speaking loudly enough that every word carried clearly across the distance. "There is a woman here who does not belong." Her voice was sharp with certainty. "I believe she may have forged documents. She is claiming to own the property, but I have serious concerns about the validity of her claim. We need someone here immediately." That small prickle of dread I had been feeling for the past 2 days suddenly turned very, very real. My hands stopped moving in the dirt. I sat back on my heels and watched Barbara pace, watched her gesturing dramatically toward my house as she described me to whoever was on the other end of the line. She never once looked at me directly, never acknowledged that I was watching her make accusations about me within earshot. The police arrived mid-morning. 2 officers, one young and nervous-looking, one older with a square jaw and the kind of steady eyes that come from years on the job. They walked up to my door politely, badges visible, and knocked with measured authority. Behind them, Barbara stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, looking like a triumphant peacock who had just won some kind of prize. "Ma'am," the older officer said when I opened the door, "we received a report of a possible trespasser at this address." My heart was hammering, but my face stayed calm. 22 years of military service teaches you how to remain composed when everything inside you is screaming. "Of course," I said. "How can I help?" "We are going to need to see some identification," the younger officer said. He was trying to look professional, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had probably been expecting someone different when he responded to this call. I nodded and reached for my wallet, which was sitting on the entryway table just inside the door. My hand moved automatically, muscle memory from years of producing credentials at checkpoints and security gates around the world. I pulled out my driver's license first, then paused for just a moment before adding my military ID. The younger officer glanced at the cards briefly, but it was the older officer who took a close look. I watched his expression shift, watched recognition flicker across his features, watched his posture straighten almost imperceptibly. "Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Morrison," he said. His voice had changed. There was respect there now, the kind that comes from shared understanding. "Retired," I confirmed. "Just moved here from Fort Bragg." The officer looked at my ID for another long moment. Then he looked at me. Then he did something that I will never forget as long as I live. He snapped to attention and gave me a crisp, precise salute. I returned it automatically, my own posture straightening, my hand rising to my forehead in a gesture so ingrained that I could have done it in my sleep. 22 years of service embedded in a single motion. Behind the officers, Barbara's smug expression collapsed. Her mouth dropped open. Her arms fell from their crossed position. She looked like someone had just informed her that everything she believed was fundamentally incorrect. The older officer turned to face her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that required no volume. "This woman owns this property. She is a retired lieutenant colonel who served this country for over 2 decades. I strongly suggest that you check the HOA records before you call us again." Barbara's face went through approximately 17 different colors in the span of 3 seconds. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, then opened it again. "I was told," she started. "There were concerns. The documentation seemed suspicious, and I was simply trying to protect the neighborhood from possible criminal activity. And surely you can understand that a woman living alone in a house this size seems unusual and—" "Ma'am," the officer's single word cut through her rambling like a knife, "we are done here." They left with a nod that communicated more than any words could have expressed. Barbara retreated down the sidewalk with a blush spreading across her entire face, muttering excuses that no one asked to hear. I stood on my porch and watched them all go. The marigolds sat unplanted beside me. My hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline slowly working its way out of my system. Tanya appeared about 20 minutes later with another plate of lemon bars and a grin that stretched from ear to ear. She had clearly been watching from her window. "You are officially the legend of this block now," she said. She set the plate on my porch railing and pulled out her phone. Someone already posted about it in the neighborhood chat. "Posted what?" I asked. She showed me the screen. Someone, probably watching from across the street, had snapped a blurry photo of the salute. The older officer standing at attention, me returning the gesture, and in the background, Barbara's stunned face frozen in a moment of absolute disbelief. The caption read, "0 confirmed squatters, 1 confirmed legend." I stared at the photo for a long moment, then I started to laugh. I had barely unpacked my blender and I was already a neighborhood meme. The community decided in an instant whose side it was on. Word traveled fast through the group chats and over backyard fences. That blurry photo mutated from a simple image into an inside joke, then into a symbol of petty justice being served to someone who had earned it. Folks began to treat Barbara differently when she passed. The nods were cooler. The smiles were more strained. The invitations to backyard barbecues and coffee mornings became noticeably less frequent. Barbara tried to recover. She handed out HOA newsletters with an exaggerated smile that never quite reached her eyes. She complimented lawns and waved at passing cars, but the warmth was not there anymore. People were polite because that is what neighbors do, but the social ledger had shifted in a way that could not be undone with forced cheerfulness. The HOA board called what they titled a courtesy review meeting about a week after the police incident. I showed up because the situation needed daylight, not whispered gossip. The meeting was held in the community center, a modest building with folding chairs and fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of coffee that had been sitting on the warmer for too long. Mark, one of the board members, opened the floor by acknowledging that there had been some concerns about recent events. His tone was carefully neutral, the kind of diplomatic language that allows multiple interpretations. I had brought my laptop. I asked permission to show something on the big screen, and when Mark nodded, I connected my email and let the thread play out for everyone to see. There it was, 2 weeks before my move-in date. Subject line, new resident notification per HOA guidelines, timestamps visible, confirmation of receipt from the HOA secretary, every piece of documentation that Barbara had claimed did not exist. The room was quiet as people read the screen. Barbara's face had gone pale. I was told there were no notifications, she said. Her voice was smaller now, defensive. I was working from the information I had available at the time. That did not fly, not with this crowd. A woman in the back row spoke up. I heard her on the phone, she said. I was walking my dog and she was standing right there on the sidewalk, telling the police there was a criminal trespasser. She did not mention anything about checking records first. Someone else chimed in. I saw her taking photos through the bushes. She was practically stalking the poor woman. Laughter broke out at one point. Not cruel laughter, not the kind meant to wound, but the sort that deflates pomposity and punctures overinflated self-importance. Barbara sat very still, her hands clasped in her lap, her clipboard nowhere to be seen. The meeting did not result in any formal punishment. Mark guided the discussion toward practical outcomes, asking what could be done to prevent similar situations in the future. People offered suggestions. The conversation turned constructive. By the end, there was a sense that something meaningful had been accomplished. Tanya stood beside me afterward, passing out coffee and small cookies she had baked to welcome people who had attended. She bumped her shoulder against mine and grinned. "You should run for HOA president," she said. I shook my head immediately. I came here for quiet. The last thing I need is more meetings and paperwork. She laughed, fair enough, but you have to admit that was pretty satisfying. It was. I could not deny that, but what struck me more than the personal vindication was how the neighborhood had responded. These were people who mostly did not know me yet, who had no particular reason to take my side, and yet they had shown up. They had spoken up. They had made it clear that they would not tolerate one person abusing her position to harass another. That meant more to me than any salute ever could. The aftermath played out over the following weeks in ways both amusing and meaningful. Comments in the neighborhood group chat turned into a poll. Should a board member be required to confirm residency before calling police? The results surged to 80% yes within hours. That translated into actual policy discussions at the next formal HOA meeting. The board tightened procedures on reporting alleged trespassers. A simple confirmation step was implemented. Check the residency registry. Email the board with concerns. Document any attempts to contact the resident directly. Only after those steps had been completed should anyone consider involving authorities. It was not punitive, it was just sensible. Mark helped write the language, and the treasurer, a grey-haired woman named Patricia who had been on the board for 15 years, called it common-sense governance that should have been in place decades ago. The measure passed unanimously. Barbara kept trying to rebuild her reputation. She complimented yards with an extra cheerful tone and lingered near mailboxes as if trying to project helpfulness instead of surveillance. People accepted her surface politeness because that is what neighbors do, but there was a distance now that had not existed before. She had shown who she was, and people had taken note. The neighborhood adopted me in ways that constantly surprised me. Kids on bikes would ride past my house and give exaggerated salutes, grinning like they were in on the best joke in the world. Someone printed a Lieutenant Colonel watch t-shirt and jogged past my house wearing it, laughing and waving. An elderly man 3 houses down started calling me General, despite my corrections, and brought me tomatoes from his garden every week. Small theatre, big message. The block would not tolerate suspicion disguised as concern, authority wielded without accountability, power exercised without verification. They had drawn a line and they expected it to be respected. What surprised me most was not the memes or the gossip, or the general entertainment value of my dramatic first week. It was the way the community responded to protect one of its own, even when that someone was brand new and barely known. There was something beautiful about that, something that restored my faith in what neighborhoods could be when people chose to care about each other. There were practical outcomes too. Beyond the revised HOA guidelines, neighbors started looking out for each other more deliberately. A young mother named Jessica told me that she felt safer knowing the neighborhood would not tolerate harassment. An older couple who had been considering moving decided to stay, reassured that their community still had standards. Mark suggested a short training session for board members on escalation protocols and appropriate use of authority. Patricia grinned and said it was overdue. The training happened the following month, mandatory for all current board members and recommended for anyone considering running in future elections. Barbara attended. She sat in the front row and took notes without comment. About 3 weeks after the police incident, Barbara came by my house. She stood at my gate, clipboard conspicuously absent, looking smaller than she had the day she first approached me. Her perfect blonde bob was slightly less perfect, a few strands out of place, as if she had been running her hands through it nervously. "I wanted to apologize," she said. I stepped out onto my porch and walked down to meet her at the gate. Her voice was awkward, halting, sincere in that way people become when they have been publicly humiliated and have finally processed what they did to earn it. "I made assumptions," she continued. "I acted on those assumptions without verifying anything. I put you in a terrible position and I embarrassed myself and I am sorry." I could have kept score. I could have listed every moment of harassment, every suspicious look, every whispered phone call. I could have reminded her of the fear I felt when those officers approached my door, the years of service that gave context to that fear, the weight of proving myself innocent in a situation that should never have occurred. Instead, I nodded. "Thanks," I said, "let's move on." She looked relieved and uncomfortable at the same time. "Is there anything I can do to make it up to you?" I thought about it for a moment. "You can help me plant some marigolds," I said. "I never finished that day." She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Then she nodded almost eagerly. "I can do that." We spent the next hour working side by side in my front garden. She was not a great conversationalist, and I was not feeling particularly chatty myself, but there was something healing about the shared labor. The dirt under our fingernails, the yellow and orange flowers taking their places along the walkway, the simple physical work that required no explanation or justification. When she left, she paused at the gate and looked back at me. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me another chance." "Everyone deserves another chance," I told her. "Just try to extend the same courtesy to others next time." She nodded and walked away. I never saw her clipboard again after that. The weeks turned into months, and the street settled back into its natural rhythm. The Lieutenant Colonel watch phase faded like a passing season, though it left traces behind. A few of those joke t-shirts still appeared occasionally. The nickname stuck in the group chat, affectionately deployed whenever someone needed a voice of reason in neighborhood discussions. The board that had once operated on assumptions now asked for proof before taking action. Barbara kept her position, but she had learned to replace bluster with careful documentation and neutrally worded emails. People accepted the civility. They just did not forget the lesson that taught it. Tanya became my closest friend on the block. We swapped gardening tips and recipes and long conversations over wine on her back porch. She told me neighborhood lore about who had built which fence, who had started the tradition of the 4th of July parade, which house had been painted bright purple for exactly 1 week before the owners capitulated to HOA pressure. I told her about my years in the army, the deployments I could talk about and the ones I could not, the friends I had lost and the moments that still woke me up at 3 in the morning. She listened without judgment, without pity, just with the kind of steady presence that makes hard stories easier to share. Respect among neighbors, I realized, is quieter than a salute. It is not the dramatic gestures or the public confrontations or the viral memes. It is the steady acts, the everyday kindnesses, mowing a strip of your neighbor's lawn when they are running late, checking on the elderly woman at the end of the street after a storm, bringing lemon bars to someone new without expecting anything in return. That is what seals a place into home, not the deed or the paperwork or even the military ID that proves you belong. It is the relationships you build, the trust you earn, the community you become part of through 1,000 small choices. The HOA guidelines changed permanently after my first month. That simple confirmation step before contacting authorities about alleged trespassers became codified policy. check the registry, email the board, document attempts to contact, only escalate when you have evidence, not suspicion. Patricia called it the Morrison Rule at one of the meetings, which made me laugh and blush at the same time. I did not want to be remembered as the person who needed protection from an overzealous neighbour. I would rather be remembered as the person who planted marigolds and shared recipes and showed up when someone needed help. But if a rule had to carry my name, at least it was a rule that might prevent someone else from going through what I went through. At least it was a rule that prioritized facts over assumptions, verification over accusation, community over suspicion. Barbara learned slowly and publicly that authority without verification is brittle. She stopped forwarding hearsay and started forwarding minutes. She stopped taking surveillance photos and started taking notes at meetings. She traded her clipboard for a more collaborative approach, asking questions instead of making accusations, seeking information instead of assuming the worst. A few neighbours said she deserved a formal reprimand. Others wanted to simply move on. The board chose the latter, issuing an official notice to complete the new training and a public apology that was recorded in the meeting minutes for anyone who wanted to read them. She made the apology with what seemed like genuine remorse. It was brief and factual, acknowledging her mistakes without making excuses for them. People accepted it with varying degrees of warmth. Some thawed immediately, others took longer, a few never quite forgot. That is the nature of community. Actions have consequences that linger. Trust once broken rebuilds slowly, but people are generally willing to give second chances when genuine effort is shown, and Barbara showed effort. She would never be my closest friend, but we could wave at each other across our yards without awkwardness. We could discuss HOA matters at meetings without tension. We could coexist as neighbours who had weathered a difficult beginning and found our way to peaceful territory. As for me, I kept fixing steps and installing shelves, and slowly transforming my house into the home I had always dreamed about. I painted the kitchen a warm yellow colour that reminded me of sunflowers. I built raised garden beds in the backyard and planted vegetables that I actually saw grow from seedlings to harvest. I hosted a small gathering for Thanksgiving and a larger one for Christmas, filling rooms with laughter and conversation and the smell of good food. Neighbours stopped by regularly. Some came with questions about yard work or HOA procedures, knowing I had become an unofficial expert on navigating community politics. Others came just to chat, to share news about their kids or their jobs or their plans for the weekend. I found myself at the centre of a web of relationships that I had never expected to build so quickly. I did not run for any office. My life outside the cul-de-sac was full enough. I volunteered at the VA hospital twice a week, helping other veterans navigate the transition to civilian life. I took classes at the community college, learning pottery and Italian and other skills I had never had time for during my service. I read novels on my back porch under Emma's tree and watched the seasons change and felt, for the first time in decades, truly at peace. The salute remained a funny memory, the kind of story that gets told at parties and block gatherings. Remember when the cops came and gave Rachel a military salute right in front of Barbara? Someone would say, and everyone would laugh, and I would shake my head and remind them that I was just trying to plant marigolds. But beneath the humour was something more meaningful. A crisp gesture that told a story louder than any complaint ever could. 2 officers recognizing service when they saw it. A neighbourhood realizing that assumptions are dangerous and facts matter. A community choosing to protect one of its own against someone who had forgotten what protection was supposed to look like. The final twist to this whole story was not revenge. I never wanted revenge, never sought it, never took any pleasure in Barbara's humiliation. The satisfaction came from something simpler and more profound. The quiet, steady fact that my neighbourhood now protected its residents, not with surveillance or suspicion, but with verification and respect. Not by assuming the worst, but by extending the benefit of the doubt. Not through power wielded arbitrarily, but through policies that required accountability. That is what community should look like. That is what I had spent 22 years serving my country to protect. Not just the grand ideals of freedom and democracy, but the small everyday kindnesses that make those ideals real in people's lives. People still asked me about the army sometimes. I answered their questions honestly, sharing what I could and keeping quiet about what I could not. But mostly I enjoyed the calm. The bird songs in the morning, the kids playing in the street, the neighbours waving as they walked their dogs, the absolute precious normalcy of it all. The best lives are not noisy. They are steady. A neighborhood that notices when something is wrong and refuses to let small tyrants bully its residents into silence. A community that learns from its mistakes and becomes stronger because of them. A street where a retired lieutenant colonel can plant marigolds in peace and know that she finally belongs. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a neighbor like Barbara who made assumptions about you without bothering to check the facts? Have you ever been the person who stood up for someone else in your community, or the person who was protected when you needed it most? Drop your story in the comments below because these experiences are universal, crossing borders and cultures and circumstances, and we can all learn from each other's encounters with entitled behavior. If you enjoyed this story and you want to see more content about people who think rules apply to everyone except themselves, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We post new stories every single day about entitled neighbors, HOA nightmares, and the sweet, satisfying moments when karma finally catches up. Your support means the world to this channel and helps us keep bringing you the content you love. And if you made it all the way to the end of this story, drop a salute emoji in the comments so I know you are part of the community. We are building something special here, a place where people can share their experiences and support each other through the frustrations of dealing with difficult people. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And remember, the best defense against people who abuse their authority is a community that refuses to tolerate it. Stay kind, stay vigilant, and never be afraid to stand up for what is right.